Hi. Is it working? Yes, I think so. So, today is March 24th. We are still under quarantine, but you guys started your new packet. We're doing diseases and plagues. Well, one plague right now. And, there was only one plague, but since then, anytime a huge pandemic hits, some people will call it the plague. So, last week you finished up the Incas. And what does it all have to do with each other? Why did I bring up the plague right after we finished up the cultures that were here pre Columbus? Well, besides the fact that it has to do with what we're going through right now, it actually is all connected. So, the world was split into four cultural zones. Last time it split into our current continents. So throughout the existence of the world, the continents, as you know, they shift on plates and they come together into one, and then they split up again. We've only ever existed on these continents. So the original continents that existed before it split into our current continents, it was called Pangaea, and it looked like this. Okay, so you can even see on a globe or on a map how it might have split. For example, you can kind of see that South America and Africa, they can almost spoon. See, they fit into each other. The way Europe fit into them, it's kind of twisted. Europe kind of went into the nuke down, and Asia was on top. Antarctica came up here. See, this kind of foot on the bottom. So when it split, it went further south, and the rest of it kind of filled in. There was more land back then. A lot of it disappeared under the oceans. Some of that land was actually ice. But even though it had some water in the middle, if you ever try to fit them all together and see that they don't quite fit, because some of them did form season lakes, and some of them were covered in land that's now under sea and ice. So you actually, I realize you cannot see. I did write out this. Okay, next time I'll do it differently. Stay. Okay, I'll just tell you what these zones were. So these zones that Pangaea fell apart into, that became really important for how we developed as people, because they were pretty much isolated from each other. They're called the four isolated cultural zones because if you found yourself as a human or as a culture developing in that zone, you could borrow from others, but usually only the ones who were in that zone together with you. So the one we talk about most, the one that had most people, most animals, most plants, most stuff happened because it had most of everything, is Afro-Eurasia. So this whole thing, we don't think of Europeans and Africans as sharing a culture before very recently, but actually, as you can see, they always kind of had access to each other. Sure, it's not so easy to walk from here to here in the medieval times or before, but anytime something big would happen, anytime something really exciting was invented, like the wheel, like modern agriculture, eventually they would all have it. Not that same year, not the same 10 years, not the same, not in the same century, but it would travel far and wide eventually. The other zone, the next most populous and with most stuff, is the Americas. Again, to walk from here to here, it's not like somebody has done that and told everybody about some invention or idea. But since they were all connected to each other, it was possible for one tribe to tell something to the one next to them, and eventually somebody would travel next step down the line, somebody would run away, and so on. They were accessible to each other. So when they learned how to plant corn, it didn't come from all over the Americas. But by the time the Europeans arrived, almost every culture in the Americas planted and harvested corn because it's a great plant. It's nutritious. It's easy to preserve and all of that. So something big happened. Somebody learned how to do something. It traveled around. It didn't travel anywhere else in the world, not until the modern times. But back then, something big happened in one part of the cultural zone. It traveled everywhere. That's why almost all of them had very good understanding of astronomy. Their calendars were very accurate. We don't know which one of them learned it first. Kind of like we don't know who in Afro-Eurasia invented the wheel. It happened somewhere first. And we know that it's not a natural thing for a person to discover a wheel because Afro-Eurasia was the only place that had it. But once somebody there did, eventually everybody did. Bronze and iron. In the Americas, the native cultures that we just discussed last week and the one before, they were very handy with gold and silver, but they had no knowledge of how to work iron and bronze. So it's not a natural thing for a human being to learn how to do. It's just that in here, and yes, they knew how to work iron and bronze in Africa and Asia and Europe. We speculate, we have several theories of who might have done it first, but we're really not sure. There are several places all over the area where that knowledge could have come out of. The third zone is Australasia. So I just told you that Asia goes with Africa and Europe, right? There is not even a separation by water from Europe to Asia. In fact, the separation that marks it is a mountain range. So people would make their way over that. But Asia is big and kind of it's not just one big clump. Some of these islands, where are you, Australia? There we go. Some of these islands still count as Asia, and even though by the time the Europeans reached Australia, it was too far to for the sailors and primitive boats to make it there. But remember how there used to be more land. Human beings came into existence before the last ice age receded. So actually it was much closer to swim, to sail to Australia from some of these Asian islands. We know for a fact that they got there for many reasons. One fun reason, we know that Asians got to Australia sometime very, very long ago and visited and brought stuff, is that Australia has dog type animals. The dingo is definitely a relative of dog, wolf, and fox. It's a canine. It's a similar animal. Felines, which is cats, they never made it to Australia until the Europeans came and brought them very recently. And funny fact about that, so the Europeans bring the cats, right? The domestic cats, the kind you would have in your house. At some point very long ago, while they were colonizing Australia, those original cats escaped. They now live in forests and they're completely feral. And it's really messing with Australian wildlife because they have a bunch of poisonous animals, all kinds of scary stuff in the forest, but they never evolved to deal with something as scary as a cat. A cat is a perfect killing machine. So the little meow cats that we have in our houses, they are terrorizing the Australian jungle to this day, because for thousands and thousands of years, Australia, their animals and wildlife, it never evolved to deal with a cat. And now they got some cats that we artificially brought. So again, back to, that's how we know that the Asians from the Asian islands made it there a long time ago. But even dating the DNA from the dingo dog, it was a very, very, very long time ago. After that, they were isolated because as the waters rose, because the ice age ended, it became too far away for anyone to sail there until the modern ships were built by the end of the Middle Ages. And the fourth area, you kind of can't even see anything there. It's the Pacific. So Hawaii is the most famous and the biggest islands that we know of there, but there are a bunch of small ones too. They didn't have any contact with people outside of their zone. They didn't have anything brought to them. Sure, there's always a theory that there was like one visit from somebody. It's possible, but it wasn't enough to share what others had. They didn't have any cats or dogs, in case you are wondering. Hawaii now has a bunch of feral cats that live in the jungle and terrorize their wildlife, just like they do in Australia, because again, a cat is God's perfect killing machine. You don't want to mess with a cat. So people and animals that were previously unused to them, they move in and they kill everything and terrorize who lives there. So four zones that don't really talk to each other. What does it have to do with disease? Why did I bring this up when the articles I assigned you on Monday and Tuesday were about the plague? I'm sorry, I'm being moved by my dog who keeps walking back and forth. Archie's craft, he's very uncomfortable when it's not about him. Okay, so if these four areas were isolated from each other, not only did they not share stuff that is great, like the wheel, like corn, like domesticated cats and dogs, if there was a horrible disease that happened on one of them, they would share it around in their own area. And by the way, just like after Eurasia shared so much of great inventions, from agriculture to architecture to how to mold metal with fire and all of that, they shared a bunch of diseases. It would start somewhere and off it would go. Oftentimes it was Asia, and it's conveniently in the middle. You can go multiple ways. Any place with domesticated animals is really a hotbed of disease, and that's everybody. Once you share your disease with all your close and loved ones, or with everybody in your nifty cultural zone, and it might take a while, even though I'll tell you one thing, disease travels much faster than invention, but it still might take some time. Once you share it, a bunch of people will die. Today we're better equipped to deal with that, and I assigned you more articles for tomorrow and so on. But a bunch of people will die, or did. But after that, the ones who are left will have immunity. Maybe not everybody, some people will be unlucky, they'll somehow still be susceptible, but it will not be a pandemic anymore in your area. Most people, after a catastrophic pandemic happens in their area, the new generations have a way of just living together with that virus, with that bacteria. It doesn't affect them same way as it affected their ancestors who were the first to come in contact with it. On the other hand, somebody in in the other area of the world, like say Americas, who never encountered whatever the heck the Afro-Eurasians bred in their area, it will just wipe them out. And if you remember from the articles assigned for last week, and it was one of the questions I asked you in Gym Kit, what was the single most important factor for why the Europeans were able to conquer the native civilizations so quickly? One of the options I gave you was guns. Lots of people chose that. Sure, guns were important, but the Incas and the Aztecs, well, the Mayas did not exist anymore, but both the Incas and the Aztecs had very well developed armies. They were well armed. Gun will always give you an advantage, but it's not everything. What really happened, the reason why it really didn't take as much effort as it would have to conquer them, is that they were dying from disease. And the disease came from the Europeans, unwittingly. Later on, they would harness it and use it for evil. But the way they brought it initially, they didn't even realize. They landed, they interacted with the natives, and the natives started to die. Because the Europeans just had an epidemic of smallpox back home in Europe. By just had, I mean within 100 years. So those people who came over on the ships, they weren't sick. They didn't know that they were carrying something extra with them. But they were carrying the germs on them. And just by interacting, just by touching some things, just by shaking hands, we don't know if they shook hands, but they exchanged goods. And that was enough. That's it, that they jumped on people who lived in the Americas who never encountered it before. And that would actually happen over and over in Americas. It was from north, where we are, to south, the cultures that we just read about. It was significantly easier for the Europeans to conquer those civilizations than it reasonably would have been, because each time they were extremely ill by the time that it got to war. So the natives had to deal both with this war that they were having and the fact that they were deathly ill, and their population was becoming smaller and smaller. So that's what 4 different parts of the world have to do with diseases. You share it within yours, and once it comes to encountering the other, the Americans gave us a couple of neat, nasty things too, but not nearly as much as we gave them. Again, because this part is bigger. It has more stuff, it has more animals, it has more plants, it has more germs. It has just more of everything. Okay? Similar situations happened when we encountered the other parts of the world. We did get the Australians very ill, and by the time we started to interact with the Pacific Islands, we were aware of the dangers, and we were trying to quarantine ourselves. If you're interested, you can read up on it. It didn't always work because we weren't always meticulous with it, but it did work sometimes. It worked better than just arriving and not knowing about it at all. So, where was I? Okay. Back to the plague. Back to Europe. Ships arrive into Venice. And as soon as the first couple of them dock and people try to get off, they're told to go back out and not come back. Because it's visible just how sick the people who are getting off the ships are. And most of the people on the ships are dead. So that's alarming. They're told to go out into the open sea. They're desperate. They are trying to find other ports to dock. Over there, they're also told to leave. In fact, mail goes out. And by mail, I mean they send people with a message. A lot of times it's not a written down thing. uh, two other ports to not allow those ships in. But just a few that dock and few people that come out, even if they're chased back onto the ships, that's enough. That's enough for Italy to be completely consumed with the plague. The way plague works. Here, we have a song about that we all love. It explains everything. You hear that? Alright. Actually, it should be more like, I don't know why little kids sing it. I really don't. I think it's creepy. This is more true to fact. So, ring around the rosy. The rosy is the flea bite. The bacteria that causes the plague lives usually in the rodents. It likes their blood. The fleas that live on the rodents, like mice or rats, they drink the blood. That's how they survive. So anything that these now infected fleas jump on and bite, they get infected too. Actually, it's not as dangerous as you'd think, knowing that half of Europe perished from it. If you get this bite and it's really bad, and you see that it's gotten infected, and you pay attention to it, then you'll be fine. Even back then, when they didn't have meds, they knew enough to cut away infected parts. Maybe you'd have like a gash there, but it helped. It didn't always work, but it worked enough times that it would, if everybody would do it, it would significantly halt the spread of the disease. But the problem is that they had so many flea bites, and so many of them were itchy and gross and disgusting, that could you tell which one was your normal lice, fleas, parasites experience, and which one was the plague? What you gotta understand is that at that point in Europe, their hygiene was disgusting. In fact, a little side step. One of the reasons Americas got colonized so quickly, people were willing to go over there and stay, and it was profitable for them, wasn't the furs. It wasn't even the religious freedom that we hear about, that everybody went there for religious freedom. Sure, it was important to them, but they wouldn't go if they couldn't pay for it. It was wood, it was lumber. The ships that were going back and forth between Europe and Americas would carry a little bit of supplies from Europe to Americas, and back they would go almost completely filled up with lumber, with wood. Because Europe was out of trees. They cut them all up to build stuff and to clear their areas for fields, to plant bread, and they were out. Now, how do you take a bath if you cannot heat up the water? Now, you might say that, sure, I'd like to take a shower that is hot, but if I'm so disgusting that I cannot tell my lice from my fleas and my body's covered in bites, I'll take a cold shower. It's cool. Well, what you gotta understand is that water in Europe at that time, especially in cities that were most susceptible to disease, just like now, the water was disgusting too. They didn't have sanitation, so they didn't go to the bathroom, flush, and have it go somewhere where it was treated. No, they would throw it into, well, sometimes onto the streets, but mostly into the rivers that would go into all their reservoirs of water. If you heard that in Europe it was common for children to be given beer and wine to drink, even though they were young kids, it's because it was safer for your kid to drink alcohol, although it was weak. Those the wine and beer was very mild, but still it was alcoholic. And the reason you wanted your small child, to drink alcohol instead of water is because alcohol kills things, and there's no way you would give your kid some water from the river, the lake that was by your house. It was just all filled with human waste. That's poop and pee. It was disgusting. It smelled gross. You wouldn't bathe in it. You wouldn't drink it unless you had some wood to boil it and make it clean, but you didn't have any wood. So that's how they lived at this point in Europe when the plague arrives. So everybody's covered in their nice lice and their sweat and their fleas, and they're used to being bitten by stuff, and some of it would get infected and some of it would turn various colors, and that was just life. So the way you knew that the plague has you, your kind of itchy and painful bite, the rosy would turn pinker and pinker, and then the ring would appear around it. And then pockets full of posies. Everywhere where it was kind of like a pocket in your body, an armpit where your leg meets your body, it would just like explode in these dots. And that was it. That's it. You were gone. Today we could treat you for that, but you would be in ER. You would be in big trouble. Would probably save you, but it's serious by that point. Back then, that's it. They didn't have the means. Your fever was through the roof by that point. You were super contagious. It would turn black. Those bites at that point would turn black. That's why it was also called the Black Death. The rosies and posies, eventually they would all like be black dots and disgusting crusty things on your skin. And then ashes, they would try to burn the bodies. Even though Europe had a long tradition of burying, they didn't care. They would burn it all, but they didn't have enough wood. They would actually have to save the bodies a bit. The body won't just burn on its own. You have to accelerate the fire with something. So they would try to get a few bodies at the same time. Wood was scarce. And then will fall down. You could wipe out the village, a small town, and on it would travel. There's an interesting example of a place that was spared. It is Lyon, France. They were a very rich town. They were the next hop stop over from where the Silk Road would officially end in Europe. Now, if you didn't go over the Silk Road your first semester, the Silk Road basically was a trading route from Asia. It would dip into Africa. It would kind of go between the Afro-Eurasia, if you will, and pick up stuff that others would think is cool. For Europe, it was silks. They didn't have silk in Europe. They had materials that were kind of crude. The linens, the wool, but no silk. Spices were huge because today I love all kinds of European food. Italian, French, and German, it's all great. Back then they didn't have any spices. They didn't have enough salt. Sugar also, it comes from plants that don't really grow in Europe. So it was very bland. It was enough for you to stay alive and healthy if you're lucky. But it didn't have any flavor. So once they discovered that in Asia they grow stuff like cinnamon and all kinds of stuff that gives flavor to food, it became really popular in Europe. So all that stuff that Europeans did not have would travel through Asia, dipping into Africa, and it would, here I have a map for you. It would come to Venice. So Venice is the end route for the official Silk Route. This is the end stop. But if you see here, the next hop over is, it says Lyon here. Lyon is in the southwest part of France. It was the capital of France when it wasn't France yet. It was the Roman Gaul. Um, that's what the Romans called France, Gaul, uh, and that was their main city there. And through the Middle Ages, that was the place that from Venice they would take most of the merchandise to, especially silks, and they would distribute it around Europe from there. It was already a nice and rich place. That was one of the reasons. They never really knew famine. That was one. That was why it was originally not poor. Everything grew well there. The reason it became super rich is that they were chosen to be the next hop stop from the Silk Road and be kind of the distribution center for the luxury goods. So they had the money. And what they did with that money during the plague is